Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Bessie Blake and her husband, Professor James Blake, as we discuss a brand new book entitled God's Bad Boy, James Blake and the System. Welcome to Cultural Caravan. Yes, I am just so excited, particularly just admiring all the great work that both of you have done collectively. This book, which is a biography about your husband's early years, as well as it leads up to your meeting, your fateful meeting, God's Bad Boy, James Blake and the System. Tell us what inspired you, Dr. Blake, to write this book.
Well, of course, he's the foundational inspiration, but there was a specific event that got me serious about, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this, because other people were approaching him saying, I want to write your story, and I kept saying, no, save that for me. Finally, he appeared on the Guild Nobles, Like It Is, and there was such a tremendous response. I mean, he got emails, phone calls, and would meet people in the street. And they would say, well, what happened to your mom? Or what happened to your sister? And that what happened next is just the beginning of a great story.
Well, one thing about the book, it basically covers from, the early years, and it's so detailed. I mean, it's riveting because you feel like you're sitting in a living room hearing this story first person. And I think the only person that could have told this story is you, his wonderful wife. And I just want to, first of all, start with you, Professor Blake. God's Bad Boy. How do you describe? What do you think about the title?
I love the title because it really speaks to who I am and who I was at a very early age. Somehow God has given me the presence of mind to swim upstream and not follow the crowd and follow the collective. And I believe that spirit that he put in me is what's responsible for me being where I am today, because there were many opportunities that I had to follow the crowd. But and that crowd could be just guys in the street, guys that you hung out with, or guys in these different institutions that I found myself in, or the system that was trying to get me to go along with them and lose my own individuality and my own self-identity. And that was very important to me. And as a result of that, I was bad.
Now, let's start at the beginning for those who may not be as familiar with the story. You start off at a very critical time in your development as a young boy, and something happens in the family. Can you share with us what that was?
I was like, first of all, let me just say, I grew up in a place called Corona, and on 108th Street. And at that particular time, the playing outside was everything. You go outside and you go out in the morning, you come home for lunch, and you go back out at night, and you stay out as long as you want on that particular block. And it was such an idyllic life because we played Skelly, Johnny Ride the Pony, Ring Illyrio. We built the little scooters with milk crates, and we had a little scraps and fights, but we were all family. Everybody on the block knew each other. And so I was just just like in heaven. I was like maybe 8 years old. I was like just in an absolute paradise, And one day, and Bessie will read an excerpt from that, but one day I was playing in the war games in back of my house, and one of my friends who I was playing with said, "Hey, Jimmy, isn't that your mother?" And I looked up, and it was my mother standing on a ledge, and she jumped. And everything from that point on went slow motion in my life. It was like she floated down, and everything stopped. And when she hit the ground, she jumped up amazingly and headed off for Flushing Bay. Okay, and you might want to read some of that on you?
Okay, wow.
Well,
Okay,
actually,
but that was
Yes,
the crucial point.
okay. It's a very short piece. On the morning of the worst day, a passion for helping others was born. Mama cooked breakfast as usual. After feeding us, she followed Granny around the house like a small child. I was 9 years old, and like most boys in 1950s New York City, my mind was on Johnny Ride the Pony, stickball, skelly, and other summer street games. I didn't notice Mama until she grabbed Granny around the waist, slid to her knees, and moaned, "Please don't go. If you go, I won't be here when you come back." The calm on Granny's face betrayed her panic as she snapped, "Nettie, stop your foolishness." Mama then released her hold and returned to the kitchen. What a friend we have in Jesus rang throughout the apartment. The hymn usually meant hot biscuits to follow, but that morning Mama was baking a cake for my younger sister Carol's 8th birthday. Singing trailed off to humming, interrupted by soft grunts as Mama reached for a spice tin from the cabinet, then bent to check the flame, making sure the oven was the right temperature. Her melodic voice reassured me as I inhaled the sweet aroma of hot dough. Granny relaxed and went off to work. I hung around long enough to wolf down a warm piece of sampler cake before rushing out to play. At age 9, I was happy with Mama in the kitchen baking a cake or biscuits while I played street games outside with friends. Sylvester, Billy, Henry, and I played war on the empty construction site in back of my house. We ducked behind cement blocks with finger guns cocked and thumb triggers pumping. The scene rolled like an action-packed movie. Bang! Bang, bang! Sylvester and I take aim at Billy and Henry, who dive behind the dirt mound. "We got you, Henry. Come on out. We got you," I yell. Billy pops up and ducks back down. "You dead. I got you. You dead." Sylvester starts toward the mound, then stops. "Little Jimmy, ain't that your mama?" He points at my kitchen window. My head jerks up. Mama stands tall, slender, black skin glistening in the afternoon sun. Her hair is wild, but her face is serene. Calmly, she steps off the second-floor ledge. My heart stops. I'm frozen in time. Then thud, time ticks past me. "She's running toward the bay." It's my father's voice. Catch her, Nettie." He takes chase. Neighbors rush to his aid, and my friends join in the race while I'm glued in place. Uncle Esau tackles Mama. Down she goes, arms and legs thrashing in the weeds, but quickly Daddy clutches her with his thick arms. Abruptly, like a speeding car slamming its brakes, the action halted, then crept forward in a slow-paced slideshow. Neighbors meal in front of our house. Daddy holds tight to Mama. Strange men in white suits take Mama and Daddy away. A car with flashing lights eases down our street. The day fades to blackness.
So when you talk about the impact of, again, your parent, and particularly she had a nervous breakdown, and how that impact on the family ultimately where it led to your brothers and sisters having to be removed from the home. And also talk us about your experience in an institution. Where did you go after your family?
Let me just go back a little
Yes.
bit and just say what's critical in this piece. And first of all, I got to say my wife is one great writer.
Oh,
She
yes,
knows
she
how to
is.
put it together.
Fantastic.
One of the critical things that occurred to me, a passion for helping was born. Up until that point, I was just living my life and just being free like any other young person in the community. But when that happened to someone who I loved so much, it bothered me to such a deep level that I never ever, as I realized, I didn't realize it then, But I realized that in the course of my life, that I never wanted to see another child have to go through that. That family disintegration, losing mama, was a rock bottom of our lives, because everybody goes to mama. When mama left, the family disintegrated. And over a period of time, as you read the book, we ended up in children's homes. First place was the Queen's Society Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which was on Jamaica Avenue in Union Hall Street. Stayed there for a while. And then as I got older, actually the first place was the Hebrew Children's Home, I'm sorry. And then we came back home because Mama got better, but not well enough to continue her responsibilities as a mother. And we ended up going back into placement to Queens Children's Shelter, which I stayed for until I was about 13. And then from there, we were split up more, and I went to a place called Woody Crest Children's Home, where I stayed until I was 18. And the strange thing about it is that when I left Corona that first time, I felt like, hey, I'll be back in 2 weeks. I was 9 years old. I didn't get back until I was 18. So that was a really riveting experience. And then being in the homes itself and having to negotiate a whole new environment with different rules and regulations and things is really critical. So, not to go ahead of you, Louise, but all of these things help me to understand the importance of family.
Exactly.
The importance of the impact you have on your children. And
Absolutely.
the importance of being able to be strong in the face of adversity.
Absolutely.
These things began to develop and shape my determination and personality.
Now, in line with that, in the stories, you talk about the extended family. There was an experience where you talked about, you were wondering, it seemed like your grandmother, who, or your big mama, as we would call her, knew everything. And it turned out, you said that the little birdie was a neighbor who happened to tell everything. So the fact that that was a time in our lives, first of all, you talk about that power of children going outside and playing something that you don't see, because all our children seem to do is play with their little video things. But children, you learn socialization skills. You had that extended family where you knew that if you did something down the corner, there was someone who was going to report back. You know, so in the story that's, again, wonderfully told, you basically recapture those traditions that were part of our communities. That extended family bond, the fact that socialization, that was so critical. And then how this impacted on your development. And we're going to spend a little time in our next segment talking about how these events actually impacted in the choices that you made and so forth. Now, as we move to that piece where you're spending time and you had to actually survive within these, and we talk about the system. Tell us what you mean by the system, because that's actually covered when you talk about entering the system as relates to children put in for the foster care or institutions. What is the system for those who, just to be clear, what is the system and how did it impact your development?
Well, the system, when Gil called me to do this interview, he was very much interested in the family court system.
Exactly.
And how our people were caught up in the system.
Correct.
And ended up being separated, families being separated, with the system not being sensitive enough,
Correct.
To help people understand what was going on. Because my father only had a third grade education, and most of the kids that I were in these different institutions with, there wasn't that high level of education, and the system never really took time to really help kids make that transition from their own community into the system. The system was more concerned about making you conform to the system rather than to find out who you were as an individual. So that complicated things for any kid going into the system, because you had a choice to make. Either you can do what the system says and lose your individuality, or you can fight against the system and maintain your individuality, which was a choice I made.
And you also,
And if I
yes,
could
please.
add, As I wrote the book, though, that was the beginning point, the child welfare system. But over the course of writing the book, I realized that the system, which we all often hear, people say in the community, oh yeah, the system this, the system that. And the system really became that conglomerate of agencies and institutions. It was not just child welfare system, which is covered in the book, but the educational system, and then there was the medical health system, and there was the criminal court system. So when you take all these systems combined, it seems daunting. And it really kind of takes a bad boy to tackle it.
And as you again put it so well in terms of how a child, in this case, and you do talk about the abuse, and you talk about the struggles that you and your siblings had trying to survive within the system, and the fact that your parents, being the fact that they weren't as familiar, or in this case your father, with navigating the system, how people were able to take advantage of the situation, but ultimately the survival part, and that's something that you articulate. There was a scene in the story where you talk about going to one of the institutions and having to prove your manhood, so to speak, and your wife eloquently recounts that experience where you had to actually prove and become this person or Spade. Can you share with us briefly, that segment? Thank you.
Okay, this was the first night that he went into the Queen's Children's Shelter in Jamaica. And I'll just start at this point. Most of the children were asleep, but a few had waited for me. "New boy, Alfredo gonna kick your butt," whispered the boy to my left as he pulled the covers over his head. "Who is Alfredo?" "What?" "Lights out," barked the counselor who had brought me upstairs. Next morning, in the eerie school-style cafeteria, "No talking," the same counselor ordered, but it did not stop the boys at the table from pounding their fists in their hands and cutting their eyes toward me. "Alfredo," one of them murmured, and I wondered which one of them was Alfredo. We ate in silence, and once in the yard, I met Alfredo. He was a muscular boy, twice my size, with scars that crisscrossed his face like lines on a road map. He was itching for a fight. Every time our eyes met, he clenched his fists and jeered, "I'm going to get you, new boy." I was scared. The kids spent the rest of the day speculating about whether or not I could whip Alfredo. Once I saw how big he was, I really didn't want to fight. I tried to wiggle out of it, but as the day wore on, it was clear I would be put to the test. It was tradition. A showdown with the new kid determined if the reigning tough guy would retain his power. I had never been a bully and didn't want power over the group. I was only going to be there for a short time. Leery about the impending brawl, I jumped when Walter, one of the only brave enough to talk to me, came up behind me at the fence. "New boy," he said, "Alfredo's going to attack you at 9 o'clock when the lights go out tonight. That's when the counselor leaves the floor. He punches real hard. He gets you down, he won't stop hitting you." Walter was no pushover. I had been in enough street scrapes to tell he had skills. But I could also tell by the way he talked that Alfredo whipped him when he was the new boy. I needed a plan. 9 o'clock drew near. A lump of fear lodged in my throat, but I swaggered to my bed, pretending to be a tough guy. The lump was dissolving to trembling when Daddy's voice rang in my head. "Calm down, boy. Never let anybody know you're afraid." The shaking stopped. "Fake out your opponent. Make him unsure." I bobbed my head up and down. "Yes, Daddy." I watched the clock near the exit sign in the hallway. At exactly 8:55, while the council was still there to protect me, I executed my plan. With the speed of a tiger and screaming like a wild hyena, I leaped across 2 beds and landed on top of Alfredo with a solid punch to his face. Another to his head, Daddy's voice instructed. Now end knuckle punches to the bony parts of his jaw, to the bones in his shoulder. Look him in the eye. Let him know you're fearless. Let him know you're determined. Alfredo's eyes glared back with naked fear, and I would have ended it had it not been for Daddy's sharp rebuke. A wounded animal is dangerous. Go for the kill. "I'ma kill you," I screamed over and over as I straddled Alfredo, pounding away. "Please, please, new boy," he begged. I tasted blood and wanted more. "My name's not new boy, it's Spade." I hurtled the first tough guy tag that came to mind. "Please, Spade." With that pitiful whimper, Alfredo's year-long reign ended. When the counselor finally pulled me off of him, I was a new king of the shelter.
Wow, that is a tremendous story in terms of courage and bravery and survival. That you're in this new world now, that you had to actually carve since we're now not just yourself, but your brothers and sisters were protected. You later on in the story, you talk about how there were 2 adults in the story, in the institution, despite some of the other types of personalities that were positive role model. You talk about Mr. Tilley and you talk about Mr. Harris, and how these 2 men, okay, in their own way, imparted certain information to you about yourself and made you see another side. Tell us about that.
Well, that was probably one of the most pivotal points of change for me and transformation, because let's start with Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris used to observe me a lot, and I'd be in fights at Woody Crest with other kids. One day he came over to me and he said, "You know something, Blake? You fight very well with your hands, but you need to learn how to fight with your mind." And I thought he was crazy. Who fights with their mind? I'm going to sit back and think while somebody whips me, And then one day he said, "I want you to come to my room. I want to show you something." So, in Woody Crest, you had some guys that were not too, straight. So I said, hey, he might be one of them. So I got some of my buddies. I said, "We're going to Mr. Harris' room tonight. He's got something to show us." He said, "Come at night when the boys," he had the younger boys, he said, "when they're asleep," he said, "something I want to show you." So I went over there with a couple of friends. We walked in. He has a flashlight, and he shines it on this magazine that says, Buy Black magazine. Then he says, "Do you know who this is?" And he says, This is a Timbuktu. This is a Songhay Empire. Do you know that your people were masters of mathematics, that they were builders of civilization? Do you know that you come from these people, that you are, you derive, these are your original? My mind was blown. I said, what is he talking about? I had never even heard anything like that all the years I was in school. And it just fascinated me, and the way he helped me was that he helped me to understand that my personal situation was really a public issue. That just as my family had broken up, I looked around Woody Crest, there were a whole lot of black families that had broken up and Latino families that had broken up. That the breakup and the destruction of the family was not just a personal experience, it was a public issue that was facing black people. So he started taking me to the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement meetings. I met Carlos Cooks. I played drums. I used to play the congas. I participated in the Garvey Day parades, in Harlem. They used to meet up at the Central Ballroom Annex on 125th Street. And I became so involved, and so my perspective began to get bigger and broader in terms of understanding, my role as a black youth in society, and black family in society. That was one way. Now, Tilley took another tack. Tilley was from North Carolina. He was a very, very blunt, open and honest person. And I had had so many social workers. And this is a message to social workers. You want to reach a kid, be blunt and honest, but also be loving. And that's what Tilly was to me. I mean, I was like in mourning about losing my family, and I was blaming, everyone for the loss of my family. And he just basically told me, he said, look, man, why are you blaming other people? Your family fell apart. You've been absent from school 90 days. You were truant. You were in a gang. You were involved in juvenile delinquent activities. Your family fell apart. He said, so what do you want? He was the first person who said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to bring my family together. That's my goal. He said, you want to do what? I said, I want to reunite, because I had sisters in foster homes, okay, and my other sister had gone to Hillcrest Children's Home. I said, I want to bring my family together. He said, well, you're going to need an education to do that. I said, well, I'm going to get my high school diploma. He said, you're going to need more than a high school diploma, something like that. And he's the one who got me to start thinking about long-term solutions to my problems, and he pointed to the value and the importance of education. So I began to mature. I was about 14, 15. I began to mature and act differently, and handle problems differently. There's one thing I say to my students at the college where I work now, is that self-esteem, knowledge of self, when you know who you are and where you come from, it's such a powerful tool.
Exactly.
It's a powerful tool, and we should never underestimate the importance of knowing who we are and where we came from. We long before slavery, we had a glorious past, and a lot of our kids today don't know the power. They don't know that, and the system knows that gives you power. I'm an example of that.
Exactly.
I could have been in a prison, but once I found out how valuable I was to society and to civilization, and how I was a part of such a great civilization like Songhay and Timbuktu, I began to think differently of myself.
Exactly. And, as we conclude part one of this story that's so powerful as it relates to human development, and as we move into the part two, we're going to talk about your meeting with El Haj Malik Shabazz. We're going to talk about the fateful meeting with beautiful Dr. Bessie Blake, and just as that human journey and experience in terms of how each of us have a role in developing one another. Thank you as we continue for part two of this story.
You're welcome.